The World Cup is 5 years away. Qatar is well advanced with various projects towards that. What's the risk to the World Cup?
Well, there are two major risks. One is the construction, just pure construction risk, delivery on time. And the second, of course, is geopolitical. And whether the situation escalates to such an extent that FIFA or Qatar themselves feel that the event is no longer feasible. But that's very hypothetical. If we look at the situation around construction stadiums now, almost all, if not all the stadiums have now been awarded. There's still a question mark about the ultimate number of stadiums. Currently, we're looking at 8. There's a question mark whether that might increase to 9 or even 12. That still has yet to be completely finalised. Some of those contracts have been awarded more than a year ago and more recently this year. So there's plenty of time for those contracts to be implemented and for the stadiums to be built. You do, of course, have question marks around the availability of materials now with the boycott. But that said, 5 years, and it's actually 5.5 years because we're looking at December 2022 for the World Cup. Admittedly, Qatar would like to have their stadiums built the year before, maybe for the Confederations Cup and for testing, dry runs and so forth. However, there's still plenty of time for these stadiums to be built, and indeed some of them are just being refurbished, so that's even less time. Probably the major worry would be is if the sanctions or boycotts escalate further, where the UAE, Saudi Arabia, for example, and Egypt place further restrictions on companies who wish to work in their home markets and would be unable to work in Qatar.
So is that, when you speak to people, you're in the market all the time speaking to businesses, is that what they're concerned about?
That is the major concern.
They have to make a choice between Qatar.
Every business wants certainty. I mean, there are things you can control and things you can't control, but certainly when you have a lack of certainty around things you can't control, such as the geopolitical environment, then that is very disturbing for companies because it creates an environment of risk and a lack of clarity on where to do business and investment and risks their income and so forth.
And do we know about, so if, sorry Jenny, you were going to say something.
For Doha metro contractors that I've been speaking to, I think they have been told to terminate the existing contracts with subcontractors that are based in the countries that imposed the boycott on Qatar, which means number one, there's termination fees involved, and number two, they will probably have to be forced to negotiate new contracts with suppliers from mostly Turkey.
So Qatar Rail, or the Qatari government,
Doha
has
Metro.
told the main contractors to terminate their subcontractors or suppliers
that
are coming from the UAE, Egypt, Bahrain or Saudi Arabia. And the question there is, well, I guess there's a question about legality, but also penalty clauses.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the fact that Qatar Rail having very stringent certification.
Has this been an official statement, or is this just people telling you this in the background?
No, the person I spoke to yesterday said they have been told that they over the next week that they will have to notify. I'm not sure if there was an official document that says that, but what he said was they have been told that over the next week that they will have to notify their suppliers based on these countries of the termination of contracts. Which
and has
means
that been told in writing or verbally?
I will get back to you on that one, but that's what he told me yesterday. And so the option now is to look for new subcontractors, possibly in Turkey, because for most Iranian suppliers would probably not meet, if it's cement piling steel, would probably not meet the stringent requirements and certification requirements of Qatar Rail. And finding new companies, certifying them would require a lot of time.
So Ed, how many companies are working in Qatar who are from some of the blockading countries? How many Saudi companies?
Hundreds, if not thousands.
So I guess we have to split this. In the project sector, we've got the contractors and things, and then we've got banks and things as well. But if we focus on the projects ones,
suppliers,
you think hundreds or
law
thousands?
Firms, banks, service providers, contractors, of course.
And would this be international companies who might be based, say, at Jebel Ali in the UAE?
Well, this is the big uncertainty, because we don't at this moment know what the next steps are going to be taken. But if it's true that Qatar is now saying we don't want UAE-based companies or Saudi-based companies working in our projects market, then of course then there's the risk of a tit for tat escalation, and vice versa, and then we could end up in a situation where the UAE and Saudi Arabia says it's either us or them. If you want to work in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, you can't work in Qatar, and this would cause a huge upheaval. The UAE and Saudi Arabia have far larger project markets and economies than Qatar, and therefore for most companies it would be a fairly clear-cut choice.
Well, it would be, except that if you're involved in a major project in Qatar and you're forced to take that choice, and by inference or by implication forced to pull out of your existing work, you are then exposed to liabilities for non-performance in Qatar then, presumably.
Exactly.
So it's not an easy choice in that regard.
This is the kind of uncertainty that companies are very concerned about. Should, for example, Turkish companies and Iranian firms continue to help Qatar, then as well, like for Turkish companies operating in the UAE, there could be recriminations for them too. It's all very unclear right now, and this is the potential to escalate that is concerning everyone, making everyone very worried, because it's already been made clear by the UAE in statements that the next possibility of sanctions is a much more commercially orientated view on companies working in Qatar.
And do you think one of the reasons they didn't take that step after Cairo yesterday was because actually you need to do a bit of thinking about the ramifications, or do you think they just want to still have that weapon available should they need it?
Well, you don't want to play all your hand at once, and this is a very drastic step. And once it's implemented, it's much harder to come back from. So I certainly think, as there has been, there's going to be a lot of negotiations behind the scenes. There's going to be a lot of toing and throwing, and we will see over the next few days and weeks what happens. But this is a very possible scenario that comes out of this. We've already seen something that's happened that almost all of us never predicted would. So it's more than possible that this is the next step. And of course there are wider macroeconomic implications. What's going to happen to VAT, international VAT? What's going to happen to the GCC customs union? What's going to happen to the GCC bloc itself? To Arab unity and so forth, to relations with Iran and Turkey. A lot is this situation has a possibility to snowball into more than just an economic boycott, but one into a more serious geopolitical situation too. And it's no wonder that companies in the region, and this is exemplified by the questions we're getting and comments we get from companies that are extremely anxious.